Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the American Civil War. We're going to be exploring its origins, some incredible untold crises of command, and the really long shadow it cast on the country. Let's get started.
Okay, let's dive into this because, when we look past the usual dates and standard history book timelines, we find these absolutely incredible, untold human realities. We usually think of the Civil War in terms of grand strategy and these massive, inevitable outcomes. But what if I told you that a single stumbling horse might have altered a major military campaign? Or that the hidden diary of a young artilleryman reveals the kind of surreal, terrifying realities of the battlefield that generals rarely ever spoke of? Or better yet, that the end of the war birthed a legal system specifically designed to completely undo the results of the peace? Let's start by looking at the immense pressure cooker that led to the conflict in the first place.
So zooming out to the big picture, throughout the 1850s, the path to war was just paved with deep political fractures. The United States was expanding westward rapidly, and with every single new territory, this massive fundamental question kept popping up. Would it be free, or would it allow slavery? The Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, those were basically desperate, failing attempts to maintain a balance of power between the northern and southern states. But the ultimate tipping point arrived with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. For the southern states, a Republican president signaled an absolute existential threat to the expansion and ultimately the very existence of their slave-based economy. Feeling like they had lost all political influence to contain that threat, 11 states made the choice to secede.
Now, to truly understand this, we really have to look directly at the primary sources. We need to look at the very words of the men who drove the secession movement. The historian Charles B. Dew analyzed the letters and speeches of the Deep South secession commissioners. These were the guys basically sent out on tour to persuade other southern states to join the secession. And as this quote lays out, their documented arguments were explicitly clear. They argued that secession was the only way to protect the institution of slavery from a federal government that they believed was determined to destroy it. So while arguments about tariffs and states' rights were for sure being made at the time, the primary documents show us that the defense of racial slavery was the fundamental, ultimate cause driving the rupture of the Union.
Right, so that's the macro level. But history isn't just about sweeping political currents, is it? It's also made up of highly vulnerable, totally unpredictable human moments. Which brings us to a rather surprising, almost unbelievable question. Did a stumbling horse change the course of the Civil War? It sounds kind of crazy, I know. But to answer this, we need to challenge the myth of General Robert E. Lee's absolute invincibility during the pivotal Maryland campaign of 1862.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is looking at that primitive, jolting USA ambulance. This thing represents sheer misery for a commanding general. On August 31st, 1862, right after the Battle of Second Manassas, General Lee was standing near his horse when a sudden alarm caused the animal to shy. Lee tripped, landed heavily on both of his outstretched hands, and severely sprained both wrists, breaking at least one bone in the process. Completely unable to hold the reins of his horse, the commander of the Confederate Army was forced into a bumpy, primitive ambulance just like the one you're looking at. I mean, just imagine the agony. Traveling over rough, rutted 19th century roads, every single jolt shooting pain through his splinted arms. It led to severe sleep deprivation and sheer exhaustion right at the exact moment he was launching a massive invasion into Maryland.
And check out this sketch, which is based on actual eyewitness accounts. It completely shatters that traditional marble statue myth of Lee. Here is the physical reality. An aging 55-year-old man with both hands in splints, his arms wrapped up in slings, entirely unable to dress or even feed himself. This intense physical vulnerability and just persistent throbbing pain likely took a massive psychological toll. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a psychological toll. It created a huge tactical problem. Historians note that during the critical Battle of South Mountain, Lee's absence from the front lines because he was stuck in that ambulance, and his inability to make personal observations led to critical indecisions and a very costly delay in ordering a retreat. The physical limitations of one single guy literally rippled out to affect the entire army.
So, let's shift gears from the high command straight down into the muddy boots of a common soldier.
The primary diaries from the Maryland campaign are astonishingly vivid. They place us right in the dead center of the chaos. Soldiers describe trying to sleep out in these fields, the air just thick and perfumed with the smell of crushed green corn stalks, ragweed, and clover. But that tranquility, well, it was quickly shattered. They describe the rattle of musketry starting off like pattering raindrops on a tin roof, and then rapidly building into this deafening roar and rush, like a mighty ocean billow crashing on the shore, constantly punctuated by the deep, thunderous explosions of artillery batteries. It was a complete, overwhelming sensory overload.
But amidst this terrifying scale of carnage, we find these incredibly surreal moments of calm. documented beautifully in the diary of First Lieutenant James Simons, who was a South Carolina artilleryman. At the Battle of South Mountain, near Boonesboro, Simons' battery was totally pinned down under a hailstorm of mini-bullets. Yet, as he notes in this wild diary entry, right next to them was General James Longstreet, sitting on his horse in a pair of carpet slippers, casually reading a newspaper. A shrapnel shell actually burst in a tree right above Longstreet, raining fragments down all around him, and yet he remained entirely unmoved. It's just a bizarre, vivid snapshot of the bizarre realities of combat leadership under fire.
But as you can probably guess, that calm didn't last. The psychological toll of the war is painfully clear in Simon's entry from the very next day, as they arrived at Sharpsburg and set up right in the middle of a cornfield. His battery was given strict orders to hold their fire. Imagine the sheer terror and helplessness of this moment for a second. You are sitting in an open field, strictly forbidden to shoot back, as the enemy artillery dials in your exact range. As Simons dryly but so intensely noted, it is extraordinary how much better the enemy shoots when their fire isn't returned. They simply had to sit there, submit to it, and endure the bombardment.
So, the crucial point is reached on September 17, 1862, the Battle of Antietam. Simons writes that this proved to be the severest battle of the war, a day where his men fell thick and fast in the infamous Bloody Lane. To this day, it remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. The exhaustion, the intense sensory overload, the physical mutilation, this was the real price paid by the common soldier for those massive political fractures we looked at earlier. But as we're about to see, the end of the battlefield slaughter absolutely did not mean the end of the struggle.
And this brilliantly illustrates how when the battlefield slaughter finally ended, a new, systemic struggle over the peace began almost immediately. When the guns fell silent in 1865 and slavery was formally abolished, Southern states very quickly enacted a series of legislation known as the Black Codes. So while technically recognizing emancipation, these laws were explicitly designed by white Southern elites to severely curtail the new freedoms of African Americans and essentially reestablish the social and economic control that had existed before the war. Basically, the battlefield just shifted from the cornfields to the courthouse and the state legislature.
Okay, let's look at the brutal mechanics of how these black codes actually worked on the ground. Under vagrancy laws, like the ones passed in Mississippi, adult African Americans had to carry written proof of a labor contract. Without it, they could be arrested, heavily fined, and then leased out to white landowners, which is essentially forced labor all over again. Under contractual subjugation in places like South Carolina, the law literally referred to white employers as masters and black employees as servants. And civil restrictions in states like North Carolina meant black citizens couldn't even own firearms without special permits, and they were legally restricted from testifying against white people in court. It was a highly sophisticated state-sponsored effort to legally replicate the conditions of slavery without using the word.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a massive constitutional collision. On one side, the federal government passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, this incredible constitutional promise of freedom, equal protection, and voting rights. But on the other side, you had fierce local enforcement aggressively pushing back. When federal troops finally withdrew in 1877, local governments used a combination of these black codes, poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright violence to completely dismantle those constitutional gains. This effectively disenfranchised African American voters and gave birth to the Jim Crow era of segregation.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound question. How does the persistent struggle between constitutional text and local enforcement still echo today? I mean, from the macro-political debates over slavery to the micro-agonies of a general in a bumpy ambulance or a soldier pinned down in a cornfield, right up to the heavy legal battles of Reconstruction, the Civil War was never just about a few dates on a calendar. It was a violent, ongoing contest over exactly what kind of nation the United States was going to be. It's a contest whose legacy we are absolutely still exploring and debating right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you eager to go dig even deeper into the incredible primary sources of our history. See you next time.